What if biology depends on quantum mechanics, not just chemistry? From birds to cells to human health, the evidence is growing. On this episode of the Impact Quantum podcast, Geoff Anders joins us to unpack quantum biology, DAOs, and a new frontier in science.
All right. Hello and welcome back to the Impact Quantum Podcast, where we explore the emerging industry of quantum computing and all the associated fields with that, including maybe even quantum biology. You don't need to be a PhD or want to go to get a PhD. You just have to be curious. And with that is the most quantum curious person I know, Quantum Kahuli. That's my new nickname, Candace. It's been a day. We were talking in the virtual green room. One of my kids' birthdays is today. They were recording this, and all three of them are homesick from school. Yeah, it's been a day. So who we got speaking to us?
We are talking today with Geoff Anders, okay? And he is the CEO of Leverage. And he also runs the Quantum Biology DAO. I'm really excited about today.
Co-founder of the DAO.
The DAO is,
yeah, but we'll get into that.
Yeah, I'm very excited to learn all about that.
I think I know what a DAO is. And it's not like a philosophy, although I think it is, like the DAO of whatever. But it is a distributed application something. Is it similar to like dApps or something like that?
It's similar in that they're both decentralized, but the dApps are decentralized applications. DAOs are decentralized autonomous organizations.
Got it.
Now, there's in actual practice, there's a question of how decentralized are they really, and how autonomous are they really? But the place where DAOs show up and are relevant to quantum is that you have this entire sector developing in Web3, the blockchain area, so in crypto, called DeSci. DeSci is short for decentralized science. We all know that there have been problems in science. There have been problems with scientific funding and scientific institutions. So then there's a question about why are there problems? What can we do about it? A bunch of people have come to think that the problem has to do with centralization. You have a small number of science funders. You have a small number of essentially research agendas that are being pursued. Wouldn't it be better if we could decentralize that? And then crypto answered the call, and you now have this movement, the DeSci, which is trying to decentralize science and through that make science work better.
Okay, that makes sense. And
so then DAOs are part of that. If you look around, DAO is a slightly larger category. There are a number of different organizations are or have DAOs. Like I think Uniswap does. The original DAO was just called the DAO and didn't have anything to do with decentralized science. But inside DeSci, there are a dozen, maybe more DAOs, which are these decentralized organizations that are trying to advance science.
I gotcha. I have some questions around that.
Great.
The first question is, is it an organization like a corporation, or is it like somebody once described a DAO as something like Reddit, but like across all these servers? And I suspect neither one of those is really an adequate description of it.
Yeah, I would say that it's a little bit like Reddit and a little bit like a corporation. DAOs have their legal wrapper, which is basically the way that they are officially incorporated in some polity. The Quantum Biology DAO, for example, is officially represented by an association in Switzerland. And then different DAOs sort of attach themselves to different legal zones in different ways. But what the DAO itself is a community of people that governs itself and makes decisions in some way. So at the Quantum Biology DAO, we debuted in October of last year, did an auction of a token called the QBio token. This token is tradable. If people want to buy it, they can go to Uniswap and or Radium if they're on Solana and get the QBio token. What the QBio token is it's a vote. These are governance tokens, and if you have 1,000,000 QBio or 10,000 QBio in your crypto wallet, when the DAO votes on something, you can plug in your wallet and you can vote using the tokens. It's one token, one vote. And when we started off, we auctioned off a whole bunch of these tokens. We raised about $7 million, which ended up in the treasury of the Quantum Biology DAO. And the thing that people got through the auction were these tokens. And so essentially, we auctioned off a whole bunch of rights to vote on how the money in the pot raised from the auction would be used. I hadn't encountered prior to doing the Quantum Biology DAO. I had not encountered this as a way of raising money. I hadn't encountered it as a way of raising money for science. But we did it. We raised a bunch of money. And now we have a community of people. I'd say there's probably like 40 or so active contributors right now. Different people have different numbers of tokens. We actually, if we want to go into this, we have a sort of slightly more complicated governance setup, but essentially what's happening is people are using the tokens to vote, and then the organization does whatever was voted on. So far, the main thing we did is we gave a grant to an organization, the Quantum Biology Institute, but we have all sorts of things. We have an event planned, Quantum Biology in Nigeria. We have an event that I think is going to happen because we have a bunch of community members from Nigeria. That's going to happen, I think, in January. We've talked about putting together curricula for universities, for especially high school, actually. And then maybe we'll start a journal. We've got a grant process that we've been talking about where we can give grants to other things in the field of quantum biology. But essentially, you could think about this like this is a miniature version of the NSF. It's giving out money and helping to set up infrastructure. So it's a bit broader of a mandate. And the whole point is to advance the field of quantum biology. So this is a new way of raising money for science and a new way of making decisions about how that money is used.
And I think that's a good segue for the next question.
All right.
What is quantum biology?
Yeah, it's a great question. So quantum biology, as one might guess, is the intersection of quantum physics and biology. Biology, as we know, studies life. Quantum physics studies a bunch of phenomena that were discovered in the early 1900s. It was the phenomenon of superposition and entanglement, spin, tunneling, and basically there's this, because quantum physics, like our best theories that describe how particles work, that is quantum mechanics. So in some sense, all the objects that we see all depend on quantum mechanics. It's like how, I've got a pen here. How does the pen work? Well, the pen is composed of particles or molecules. Those are locked together in particular ways. And if you really want to understand how it works, you have to go down to the quantum level. But for practical purposes, you don't need to understand quantum physics in order to use a pen. You can just use the pen. That's fine. The big question is, in order to understand biology, and this is both on a theoretical level and practically, we want to make people healthier, do you need to understand quantum physics? A bunch of people have thought, no, we don't need to. Quantum effects disappear before we end up at the time and length scales that show up in biology. But a growing number of people have proposed, as the scientists, that actually, no, there are quantum effects that are important for understanding biology. So if you're a biologist and don't know how quantum works, then you're missing something important. So that's what quantum biology is. I can say, like, in terms of where the field is, right after quantum physics came out, theorists jumped in and were like, okay, let's apply this to life. They had a bunch of interesting ideas. It took until the 60s or 70s before we ended up getting candidates for effects that actually look like you need to understand quantum in order to understand the biological effect. Maybe the clearest example is photosynthesis. Photosynthesis, the best understanding, uses a quantum effect. So you have to understand quantum physics in order to understand how photosynthesis is working at the bottom. There's then a question of people have used quantum physics to help explain how birds detect the Earth's magnetic field. So there's an overlap between quantum and magnetobiology, which we should talk about. But essentially, where we are right now is that scientists have discovered a few interesting places. Enzyme tunneling is another. There's proton tunneling in DNA. There's a bunch of these examples. And then the big question is it just going to be that for quantum in biology, all you need is to know a couple, like the short list of examples. You could think of those as exceptions to the classical rule. Or is it the case that actually quantum is doing something in biology that's bigger than people have thought, and we need to figure out what that is?
That's a good way to put it. And there's a number of the birds sensing or
Yeah.
animals in general sensing that. I also do wonder, and this could just be because I'm not a biologist, but if I can get a magnetic compass to sense the direction of the field, like why can't there's a lot to unpack, but like why can't there be cells that would have evolved to pick that up too, right? I'm sorry, cut you off. Go ahead.
So, well, on that one in particular, it's interesting. There are bacteria that scientists found called magnetotactic bacteria that actually contain small magnetic crystals. And the magnetic, and you can see them in a microscope, and they line up in a rigid line such that the Earth's magnetic field actually acts on it like a compass needle. So if the bacteria are alive or dead, if you rotate a magnetic field around them, the bacteria themselves will rotate. And that's it's like they contain a compass needle. So you need electromagnetism to understand that, at least on a physical level, but you don't need quantum. And so then there's a question of, are there other things that are going on that are happening? And it's part of, and there's an actual scientific puzzle here. I mentioned that there is an overlap between magnetobiology and quantum physics. Scientists have been coming across evidence of weak magnetic fields, like the Earth's magnetic field, having effects in biology, and they've been coming across this for a very long time. But the interesting thing is that the Earth's magnetic field is sufficiently weak that it's hard to explain how it actually affects things. Like if the cell has a little miniature compass needle made up of magnetite crystals, then we understand how it can work. But you look inside other organisms. So there was an experiment done by the Quantum Biology Institute that essentially we raised tadpoles inside and outside of a hypomagnetic chamber. The hypomagnetic chamber blocks the Earth's magnetic field. So inside the chamber, less than 1 nanotesla. Outside, you have the Earth's magnetic field, which is roughly 50 microteslas, so it's like 50,000 times stronger. And we found that the tadpoles inside the hypomagnetic chamber developed more quickly. There are other experiments with putting organisms into hypomagnetic conditions. You block the surrounding magnetic fields, and it has a bunch of different effects. Change in growth rate is one of these. There are a number, but then the question is, how does it work? You look inside the tadpole, like the tadpole embryo or the frog embryo, and you don't find the magnetic crystals. So, okay, so what's picking up the magnetic field? And then if you want to really dig into that, one of the big options is it's something from quantum. What is it that, I mean, I find quantum biology really exciting, but I'm interested in what do you find exciting about it?
Well, the fact that it exists in nature, it's been there, it's been there
Mhm.
since nature, and it's only now or recently in the past, couple decades become apparent to us that it's there and we're just playing catch up. You know what I mean? We
Yeah.
don't really understand it. And we talked about before how, the way people see is in quantum with light wavelengths, and
Hmm.
the way we taste and the way we smell,
Smell.
or
Yeah.
Yep.
right, or why
Yep.
certain processes work better in certain people. But then it kind of makes me wonder, like, why, for example, you have all these people who have like diabetes because like their pancreases can't manage the
Hmm.
insulin, and I'm wondering, is the pancreas quantum? You know what I mean? Like, can it
Yeah.
all be applied,
Well,
you
this
know?
is this is what's really exciting about it. It's the I mean there are a couple different like really general arguments you might use that uh sort of like sort of queue up quantum as a thing that might be important in biology. So it's like first of all, we've got you know quantum just is our best understanding of how particles work. Okay. Nature had billions of years to take advantage of that. According, as far as we understand evolution, it will have taken advantage of that every place that it could. And so that means that it just that's an antecedent or an initial reason to believe that, well, probably quantum's going to show up somewhere in biology. But then you also have the magnetic effects. Magnetism is one of the fundamental forces. Technically, it's electromagnetism, sort of go into that, but it's essentially one of the fundamental forces. It looks like it has effects on many different organism types and cell types and different proteins. And it's something that really hasn't been studied very much at all. Biology is still this big puzzle. Like if given all the things we know about biology, you say to someone, okay, build a cell. They're not going to know how the thing actually works from first principles well enough to actually be able to do something like that from scratch. So we're clearly missing something big. I think we're missing multiple big things, but then magnetism, all of quantum, the stuff has got to be there somewhere. And so then the question is, well, how do we actually explain these weak magnetic field effects? How, like, we're not at the point where we're going to be able to say, well, your pancreas does A or B because quantum. But as we pin down what are the more pervasive quantum effects, that at least I believe that we're going to end up essentially finding puzzle pieces that will say, okay, we thought we understood what was happening with your pancreas, for example. Actually, to really understand it, here's all of this, 21st century science.
I
That's
mean, that makes
great.
sense. I mean, because we've not really, quantum has been around at least in mathematical kind of theoretical spaces for a century. I think
Yep.
in practical terms, maybe 20 years.
Well, it depends what you want to
For,
use it for. What makes you
I,
estimate it at 20?
and it's just a good ballpark number in the sense of, we had lab experiments that can kind of prove out a lot of these things. And I don't
I think
recall.
60s and 70s
Okay, so
is
60s and 70s.
but it
Okay.
but there have been developments where including through like there has been an increasing focus on you being able to interact with quantum phenomena. This is quantum computing. You also have quantum sensors,
Hmm.
and this has helped move us to a situation where we're actually ready now to start directly probing quantum states inside cells. Like that is a very exciting prospect. It's a thing you can actually do. This is the Quantum Biology Institute's main project. You build a microscope that shines a laser. The laser bounces off a bunch of mirrors and then goes into the cell. And then you hit the cell with a weak magnetic field, and there's a particular quantum mechanism that will produce different levels of fluorescence based on how it works. And so you can actually measure the light coming off of the cell, or the proteins inside the cell, and that will give information about how long quantum states actually exist inside cells. This is, as I said, this is the Quantum Biology Institute's main project. This is the sort of thing that we can do now, and we are.
That's a good way to put. I think that I don't think we know enough yet to really know how far this rabbit hole goes. And I think that it's only been in the last number, whether it's 2 decades or 5, 6 decades, that we knew that there was a rabbit hole. And I think as we were able to kind of explore it, I think it can only go up from here in terms of figuring out what medicines, what treatments, and things like that. I do wonder kind of like, will this prove out things like, that feeling you get, you think of somebody and then they call you, right? Or like little stupid things like that, but like, what sort of sensory things that would have evolved that would have made sense for, animals, right? One of the, it's, I don't know if it's folk wisdom or, hearsay, or there's another fancy word for it. Circumstantial evidence that, before a big tsunami or an earthquake, animals start freaking out, right? What is that true? Whether or not it's true, like what would in the kind of the strictly classical view of the world, like that's not really possible, right? There's not many mechanisms. But when you start adding quantum, like certainly there's more avenues for that to be a thing.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So many animals are able to detect the Earth's magnetic field. Sharks are an example. Birds seem like an example. The magnetotactic bacteria do rotate, but that's a little bit different of a thing. But there are a bunch of animals that can detect and very plausibly use the Earth's magnetic field as part of migration. So then there's a question of, well, can humans detect a magnetic field? So when you walk around, you are walking through a magnetic field. This causes electromagnetic induction, which could conceivably have an effect on some of your neurons. But we don't, at least the vast majority of people don't notice a large effect when you turn and face north, for example. And so then there's, okay, well, is there actually this sense? Now, there's an interesting experiment that was done. I think this was a team led by Joe Kirschfink. I think this was Caltech. What they did was they had people sit in a chair blindfolded, and then they rotated a magnetic field around their heads, and it caused in some of the subjects a distinguishable, measurable change in the brain waves of the people, the alpha waves in particular. So, okay, that's interesting. The brain, it seems, is picking up a change in a magnetic field. How does that work? In this particular experiment, they did a thing to rule out one quantum mechanism. And in general, with magnetic effects in biology, we don't super solidly have the answers, but quantum is a major contender. And then if humans can subconsciously detect magnetic fields, what does that mean? And there definitely are people who have proposed that, you think of your friend right before they call you, that there's some sort of, entangled state happening. The thing with those sorts of proposals are really interesting, to be able to actually get to the point where we could test something like that. There are all of these building blocks that need to be put into place. It's like, let's figure out how humans are responding to magnetic fields at all. And then looking at how that works, are there things that would let us explain some of these weirder phenomena?
I mean, just because, not to go all like woo-woo on it, but like, I think about that guy, Tyler Henry, who talks or has some kind of interaction with people beyond the grave, and the things that he reveals to the people that he's reading are just undeniably, correct and weird. And so, and since energy, when people die, their body is gone, but their energy doesn't disappear, right? So, I think that just because we can't put our finger on it doesn't mean that it's not, certain people might be able to tune into it. And maybe we've just removed ourselves so far from nature that those kind of wavelengths are not part of our world so much anymore.
So I think for hypotheses like this, I think in general, scientists have made a mistake, which is that they tend to dismiss this stuff out of hand, where I actually think the thing that's needed is figuring out what sort of experiments would allow us to control for different causal mechanisms. So when I hear about someone being able to read information in some way about a lost loved one, there's a question about, are they interacting with the deceased person's energy in some way? Maybe they're picking it up off of the person who knew them in some way. And then if they're doing it that way, it's going to be by means of, subtle nonverbal communication. And then how would something like that work? But I think that for things like that, you want to think. I've heard people using quantum physics to give retrocausal explanations of events. So retrocausal means that it's causing it backwards in time. I think backwards in time causation, that would be a big deal. I think it's worth considering whether that sort of thing can happen. But I was in a conversation with someone about this, and I suggested, well, maybe the people have already downloaded the information from each other subconsciously, and the thought was, well, okay, I hadn't thought of that. And so I think something that science can do is it can help us to apply discipline to and actually investigate these sorts of things. And for that, you need people to seriously think about what are the different causal mechanisms, and could you actually end up with entangled states between people at great distances such that you could end up with communication of one or another type. So I think that sort of stuff needs to be examined. The public is interested. There actually are gaps in our scientific understanding. Scientists don't always like to admit that, but that is absolutely true. But in order to do it, we need research. You need a research plan. You need to think through what are the different causal mechanisms.
So that's really interesting. So
and there's a lot more causal, that could be theoretically, basically what you're saying, there's a lot more going on than we're aware of, either consciously or just in the scientific community, right? I think if you went back in time and talked about radio waves, say 1700s, you probably would have been burned at the stake if you weren't lucky. And if you were lucky, you would probably be sent to some remote facility.
I think in the I don't think they would have burned you at the stake for radio waves in the 1700s, but I agree that you definitely, in the 1700s, actually, the late 1700s, you get this phenomenon. So there's Franz Mesmer, who a part of mesmerism, this is now a synonym for hypnotism, but he basically thought that he had locked on to a special type of magnetism. He called this animal magnetism, and essentially could produce what looked sort of like they were psychic or telepathic type effects in people. And so then, the whole story goes, this created a huge fuss, and the King of France demanded a commission. I think there were 2 commissions that looked into it. One of them was led by Benjamin Franklin. Franklin comes in, or at least his team comes in. They run all these tests. The thing that the Franklin Commission came back with is the phenomena are real. It's not regular magnetism. We're done.
Right. They didn't want to.
Yeah, they actually said, we don't look into this more, but it's it's interesting because it's not going to be magnetism as it was understood in the 18th century. Then there's a question of, have the developments in quantum physics caused us to either understand new ways that weird things could be happening, or has it left gaps? It's people, when they talk about quantum, tend to talk about how weird quantum itself is. I actually have been struck by how much quantum shows us that we don't know. Quantum physics itself is really not a complete theory. You talk to different quantum physicists working on different things, they have different analogies and metaphors. They all agree on the equations, but it's not clear what the equations mean. And it's actually really hard to apply the equations in lots and lots of circumstances. So you just end up with all of these. It's like, is there a cleaner understanding of what's actually happening? Is that possible? Like, what metaphor should we be really using? What happens when you're interacting with more than 3 particles or 30 particles? You can simulate up to some level. Actually, there's a link to quantum computing there. One of the things quantum computing could be helpful for in quantum biology or in quantum physics in general is helping us to simulate quantum states. The quantum equations are very hard to use. And so you can't just take the equations and say, okay, here's how a cell, which has a membrane and has water and has ions and has proteins and all of this, here's how it's going to behave. It's just not computationally tractable. So quantum itself points the way to, there's got to be some further theory, there's got to be new stuff for us to understand.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's you have to have, best description I heard of it is you have to have an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out, right? Like, I think, we had another guest on last season where we were talking about, she was talking about how Eastern philosophy and Eastern thinking tends to allow for these things. And if you look at Western kind of esoteric traditions, we kind of threw all the baby out with the bathwater in during the Enlightenment, right? Where we became really hardcore on empiricism. Not that that was bad, because generally speaking, stake burning kind of stopped being a thing. So that was the upside. But the downside is that we threw a lot out with that. And I think that maybe because of the new advances in science, or better understanding about some quantum effects, and being one of them, is maybe we're rediscovering, maybe it wasn't all hokey.
I think that that's a very interesting line of investigation. It's when you have things that are repeatedly reported by people, it can sometimes take a while for the scientific community to actually figure out that those things are real. In some ways, there's a sort of good reason for this, which is that not all reported things are actually real. I'm currently no on Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster, for example. But things that are commonly reported, also things that people report being useful, there's tons. You'll hear scientists from the Western tradition making fun of chakras, for example.
Right.
Chakra systems have been around for a while. There's really fierce competition in the area of systems that will help you to understand your body and healing. So I think that there is a prima facie reason to investigate anything that has been around for a while or is reported by a bunch of people. And then you want people who actually understand the science, understand what we've figured out, and understand what is not figured out, so that it's possible. The other thing that's great about the scientific method is you can make progress. You can come to understand things before there was St. Elmo's fire, the electrical phenomenon where you get this glowing on the ship's mast.
And an 80s movie, but yeah.
Okay. It's that sort of thing where it's absolutely real. It's seen by a lot of people. How do you explain it? It takes a while to get to the point that we can explain it adequately well. And that's just going to be true for a lot of things.
Is that also called ball lightning as well? Is that another, or is that
ball lightning's a different thing? Ball lightning, you get these. This is one where I was trying to track down the reference. I had heard the story that people had reported it, but scientists didn't believe it until an airplane with scientists was maybe coming back from a conference and got struck by a lightning bolt, and then a ball lightning, which is just a ball of lightning that sticks together, like went down the aisle and they all saw it. Like, okay, it's real. But I haven't been able to find where I saw that stories. I've not been able to verify that. But that's the sort of thing. A ball lightning, you get balls of lightning that move around. They're different colors and sizes and last for longer than you would expect.
Yeah, and then there was also something called red sprites, I think, which pilots had reported for years, but it wasn't until satellite images of them were seen. Basically, they tend, I don't know the details, I don't pretend to know details, but they tend to appear in major thunderstorms, right? These tend to pop out effectively randomly, but pilots, like high altitude pilots, military pilots, would see them on a regular basis, and scientists would be like, yeah, okay, you were probably like oxygen deprived or something. But when they actually had like an orbital satellite would see them, and they'd be like, oh, this is the thing. Yeah.
Well, and this is one of the things where science is empirical, it's based on observation, but there's error in observation. And one of the things that theory does is it helps you to keep a handle on where you would expect error in observation. So and then you end up with false positives and negatives. So you can end up with circumstances where an effect is real, but you don't have a theory. And so you haven't really looked into it. And this is what we're doing with magnetobiology. There isn't a good theory to explain the weak magnetic field effects. And so some people are like, I guess they're not real, but it looks like they actually have been observed. So now the task is, how do we explain it theoretically?
It's like that.
I'm sorry, Candace, go ahead.
It's like that area in Canada where the gravity is not as strong, and like cars roll backwards, and I think it's in Hudson Bay.
Oh, there's a bunch of these places. These are like little tourist traps. I don't know how they get away with it.
I haven't looked into that.
But there are actually satellites that do. So I don't know how legit. I don't know anything about Hudson Bay. I know there's one in Pennsylvania between here and where my in-laws used to live. But there's also there also are satellites that have measured kind of weird variations in the Earth's magnetic field. Whether or not people could detect that consciously, I don't think we can do it consciously. Whether or not that has an effect on us unconsciously, who's to say, right? And another thing I want to point out is, like, maybe the fact that I can't turn my head and know, hey, north is in that direction, right?
Right.
I think we also remember our cognition is geared not towards for us to explore the environment. Our cognition is biased towards keeping us alive, right? So me knowing that I'm like 2 degrees off magnetic north matters very little, knowing that there's a saber-toothed tiger coming this way, right?
Right. Well, right. And this is, you could imagine, like, evolution is frequently, though not always, going to kick out the stuff that's not helpful. And so maybe sharks kept it because they're traveling long distances, and in addition to an electrical sense, it's useful to have a magnetic sense, but maybe humans kicked it out. The animal studies, I think, are quite challenging because there are so many different ways that you could have an effect. It's like the birds navigating using the Earth's magnetic field. It's how much is it the Earth's magnetic field versus how much is it sight and memory? You could say, well, they navigate, when they're first born, so they haven't seen it. It's like, okay, but how much do birds actually communicate information to each other? Okay, well, now we're at, this is extremely hard to know. And so you can have cases where magnetic effects are real, but it's one of 5 causes, or it's like a small contributor. This is why I like the physics approach, basically, where you look at what the physical laws allow, and then you look at what you observe, especially in circumstances that are better understood, at least to start with, and then you try to figure out some way to make B make sense using A. And that's the big challenge. It's a hard thing to do.
Oh,
science is
really
hard,
exciting.
man.
It's exciting, but it's exciting, the different ways you think about the quantum mechanics, and in a way it's about information processing, right? And energy transfer. It's very exciting. And when we think about what does it mean in terms of evolution, like you said, I'd love to talk more about evolution, with quantum mechanics, right? Like, I wonder if there's certain things that are then optimized that maybe shouldn't be, but that is what moves forward in the evolutionary process, or if that matters at all. I don't know.
What makes me wonder, I'm sorry, what makes me wonder is you mentioned, I think it was tadpoles, like they grow faster in the absence of a magnetic field.
Yeah.
What's that going to mean for if ever humans colonize Mars? Like, will we be overrun by like Martian frogs? You know what I mean? Like, will the Martian frogs be like these giant things because there was no magnetic field? I don't know, like little things like that. I mean, like these sound like really kind of out there stuff, but this is going to have practical application at some point within our lifetimes, I would say.
I think so. The one I want to know about is whether the Earth's magnetic field has any effect on the sperm and egg, basically, for humans. Like, is there some way that the Earth's magnetic field or the electromagnetic radiation environment that we currently live in, how does that affect conception and the development of a newborn, like these or a fetus? These are, Mars does not have a magnetic field that is the same as the Earth's. It's variable. It's not the same strength.
Oh, so it does have one.
It has. I was looking at different research. Different people classify it as yes or no, but there is a magnetic field, and I believe it varies, and I believe it's a different strength than the Earth's.
Okay.
Okay, but then there's a question of what does that do to fundamental biological processes?
Right.
And I'm not sure. It's possible to run experiments on this, and this is something that I mean, the DAO has a bit more of a collective decision-making process. But one of the things that I hope we end up looking at is what happens if you raise human reproductive cells inside a hypomagnetic chamber. Does it do anything to the sperm or the egg? Like, does anything happen if you block the Earth's magnetic field? I'd love to know that.
No, I think that would be an interesting thing because will they become like the X-Men? Like, is that going to be the?
I mean,
or will it be like something like that, or will it be or maybe because I think it's also a valid thing, right? If you look at the way we live today versus the way how we evolved,
yep,
we are bathed in electromagnetic radiation now in ways that nature I don't think ever intended. And as far as we know, it's probably okay.
Well, there's a difficult question here. So, and this is one of the things that the Quantum Biology DAO has been looking into pretty slowly, but we're making progress. You have the Earth has a magnetic field, but there are also electromagnetic waves. This includes light and radio waves and X-rays and UV light and so forth. Essentially, what these differ both in that the electromagnetic wave has an electrical component and the magnetic component is oscillating. That makes it so that you can have different effects on cells or on proteins. And there's a really interesting question. What do the electromagnetic fields we're now surrounded by, what effects do they have? I think we can rule out that there are large acute effects. And that's because we would know. You'd turn on your Wi-Fi and you would black out. That's not a thing that happens. So we know that there aren't large acute effects. It's possible that there are chronic effects. These are the sort you could imagine effects that happen over 10 years, 20 years, and then and then there's a question of, are there such effects And if there are, what are they? One interesting data point is that some people have noted that there seem to be mass extinctions on Earth seem to be timed at least some degree with reversals of the Earth's magnetic field. Okay, if we evolved in a way that's taking advantage of the Earth's magnetic field in a way that's not well understood, parentheses, probably because of quantum or possibly, then, well, maybe when the Earth's magnetic field switches, this causes a major problem. And it causes a problem not on the scale. I mean, one of the blind spots I would suggest for a bunch of current science is in time frames. You have so many experiments that are done on a very short time frame. What if you end up with effects that happen over the course of a couple hundred years? That's going to be hard for us to figure out. We switch on all the EMF now, nothing seems to happen. Our cells get affected in some way, check back in 200 years, and now you're actually starting to see effects. That, I don't know. I'm not sure. But we do have this timing thing with the Earth's magnetic field switching and mass extinctions. So is that real is one question, and then what does that mean? How does that work?
It's too soon to say either way, it sounds like. If you had to kind of bottle that up into a sentence, right? It's hard to say definitively either way at this point.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I'd love us to figure out in advance.
Yeah. So, because I think at some point, I'm sorry, Candace.
No, go ahead.
So one of my favorite TV shows and book series is The Expanse, and one of the things was how physically people will evolve,
right, in
different gravity environments, and that's kind of obvious. But one of the more subtler things in the book was that there was a cottage industry of people that would, I guess, one or two of the asteroids have an actual stable magnetic field, at least according to the book, and people would basically freeze their sperm and egg cells and store them there because thinking it would be more protected. It was a throwaway line in one of the books, and
that's very cool.
There was also it made it into the TV series where the Earth delegation is going to Mars because Mars in the story is a separate country,
right?
And they noticed, like, hey, look, there's an aurora borealis on Mars. Like, wow, it's like, oh yeah, their engineers just got the magnetic field going.
Okay.
Like little things like that. That's why I thought.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this: what would constitute a true breakthrough that would convince skeptics that quantum biology is foundational and not fringe?
Let's see. I think there are a couple different answers. So it's not so much fringe as it's thought of as just not necessarily that important. I think the thing that would show it to be important, so there's a couple avenues. So first, one of the different people don't pay attention to quantum biology for different reasons. One is that a bunch of people, including physicists, think that the quantum states actually go away too quickly for them to have an effect in biology. The way that this is usually phrased is in terms of heat. It's called the KT problem, where essentially you imagine that inside the cell, there's heat is being given off, but heat has a randomizing effect. And so if you have small effects, but they're occurring at a level that is much smaller than your randomizing effect, then your small effects get lost in the random noise. I think that that's the main scientific concern, or you could phrase it as an objection to quantum biology. An experiment that would show, so a really important experiment would be one that would show that quantum states last for however long inside cells. I mentioned the Quantum Biology Institute is building a microscope. This microscope will allow it to detect the duration of quantum states inside cells at room temperature. If it comes back that it's just picosecond level quantum states, that's a big negative for quantum biology. If it comes back in the hundreds of nanoseconds, then this is all still very short, but that's very positive for quantum biology. So actually getting a measurement of the duration of quantum states inside cells, that one's really important. I think that getting an effect, so from the biochemistry side, if you could get a magnetic field effect that you could control, that would cause a 4x or 10x level of, let me say 5 to 10x change in some factor, then I think people would care about that. Pharma might start to think, okay, 5 to 10x, we can use magnetic fields. Let's start using magnetic fields to influence how proteins are behaving. So I think that one, that would be, and there are some studies that report fairly large effect sizes. I think that's where I'm getting the 4x from. But that, I think replicating those sorts of studies or finding things that show even larger effects, I think that would be really valuable. And then I think the thing you really want is you want an ability, you want a theory that tells you why something's happening, along with an observable where you can produce a new effect that you haven't seen before. And I'm not sure what this would be in quantum biology. I also work with some people in, I mentioned, it was not, yeah, sorry, losing track, lots of conversations. I also work with people working on quantum material science and nucleonics. One of the potential effects from some of their work is making it so radiation goes away much faster than expected. Like there's a normal radiation decay rate. Yeah, imagine if you could de-radiate nukes so that your radioactive waste, so it's like, okay, it's decayed now the thing is safe. If you can produce an effect like that, where and you have a theory that says how you can do it, then I think basically you win. For quantum biology, I have some ideas for what that could be. I myself have mostly been trying to figure out what are possible theoretical explanations for the magnetic field effects. It's very strange. The simple version is you have a stationary cell that has no known large magnetic particles, so it's not like magnetotactic bacteria, and you apply an Earth-level magnetic field, so let's say 50 microtesla, and it has an important effect on the cell function. How would you explain that? And that if you can give an explanation of that, then I'm like, okay, great.
Interesting. And just so you know, just the magnetic fields are measured in something called Teslas, right?
Yeah.
Not the car. And when you say nano Tesla, it's not a little toy car. I only realized this when I went to get an MRI some years ago. It said something like it was so many megateslas or something like that.
Yeah, so Teslas are really strong as far as magnetic fields. So 0.5 is, I think, MRI is 0.5 and greater. And so then, yeah, the Earth is 50 millionths of a Tesla. And so that's much smaller. And this is actually part of the reason that people don't think about magnetic field effects is you can go into an MRI and there aren't obvious adverse effects. And so you think, okay, well, this isn't, I mean, it's a really strong field. So then magnetic fields don't seem to have an effect on biology. The interesting response is that there's a question about whether there's a sweet spot where I need to figure out a way to say this less technically, but particles have a feature called spin. Spin, when you apply a magnetic field, it can cause spins to align. A strong magnetic field can cause the spins to all align. And then as your magnetic field gets weaker, then the magnetic field from the nucleus of the atom can interfere. And so it may be that there are interesting effects that can occur when your magnetic field is smaller than or much more comparable to the strength of the magnetic field coming from the nucleus of the atom. And that's so then, yeah. And so this would mean that something like MRIs are sort of throwing people off track or giving them,
Well,
throwing
like,
them off the
what would
scent.
happen if you put a shark in an MRI? Would it be like, whoa, what just happened? Like, would it No, I'm just something like that. I don't know if that's ever been tried, but
I mean, so people have subjected birds to electromagnetic radiation, and that can throw them off. That's one of the reasons that people
okay.
think that birds navigate using the Earth's magnetic field, is because you actually have you have an effect where you can disrupt something. But the thing is that the field strength that they're using is one that's larger, as I understand it, than occurs in nature. So it's it might be that you could disrupt it with a particular mechanism, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the mechanism that's operative in nature. Anyway,
Right,
yeah.
they may be only able to take in up to a particular level of input, and once you go beyond that, all that's kind of wasted. It might be.
Yeah,
it's just fascinating. Like this is
Yeah.
all on the table now, right? Like in terms
Yeah.
of what's possible. Sorry, Candace, I cut you off.
No. This is fantastic. I mean, we can have another conversation just about spintronics and
Right.
like, I love it. I love it. So no. I got so many more questions. We're gonna have to ask them to come back.
For sure, for
Well,
sure.
I'd be happy to come back.
So that's cool. Thanks for talking to us. Thanks for explaining DAOs and
Oh, sure.
because that
Absolutely.
alone, I think that alone has some interesting possibilities of reform in science funding, right? Like there's a lot of things that that could enable that.
Yeah, I think so. And just as as a thought, there's indication that people are actually taking more of a look at these things. The National Science Foundation recently issued a call for information because they're planning to fund a bunch of independent research organizations. This is outside of academia and outside of industry. And the only reason they would do that is they think we need to make faster scientific progress, and it doesn't, people are worried about the pace of progress coming out of academia. So it's like, what can you do with independent labs? You could conceivably do a lot, and you can do things that are outside the sort of previously received narratives, and you can do them in new ways, which means we can figure out quantum, we'll figure out how quantum works in biology, figure out how magnets affect everything, and we can fund it in a new way. At least I'm excited.
No, that's very cool. That's very cool.
Fantastic.
Where can folks find out more about you and what you're up to?
So check out leverage.institute. That's the Leverage website. We will have a new website, ideally within a couple weeks. And actually, if this podcast is published in a little while, then maybe by the time this is published, then we'll have our new website up. But yeah, you can learn about what we're up to, and affiliated organizations, and like essentially, there's this attempt to advance the actual frontier of science, and to do so using, we're happy to work. We've got some academic partners, and we've got people outside of academia. It is the thing that matters is advancing the frontier, and a bunch of us are doing it.
It's fantastic.
Very cool.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Geoff. Thank you so much for today.
Absolutely.
Excellent.
Thank you guys.
All right, and we'll let the outro music play.
Quantum podcast, turn it up fast. Candace and Frank blowing my mind at last. Quantum podcast, they're breaking the mold. Science and sky beats, it's bold and it's gold. The multiverse is skanking in time. Black holes are wailing in a horn line so fine. From Planck scales to planets, they're connecting the dots. Candace and Frank, they're the cosmic hot shot. Quantum podcast, turn it up fast. Candace and Frank blowing my mind at last. Quantum podcast, they're breaking the mold. Science and sky beats, it's bold. when it's gold.